I'm live! Yay! We're trying to do the live minute ahead, but we'll be starting our conversation officially at 7 because we don't want anyone to miss out on even just 1 minute of conversation about mental health. So we'll start in just a second, but hopefully some people will start to arrive. If you are watching this and it's not 7 o'clock and you're watching a rerun of this, put your calendar on it and get subscribed to R&R mental health videos so you can be right here at 7 and enter into the chat for conversations on mental health. But let's get into it. Okay, so here's what we do with mental health unscripted at 7 o'clock. We have a chat, and on that chat, I answer any questions people have about their mental health. So hopefully we'll have people log in and ask questions. And if I don't have questions, I will just make up stuff. And you'll hear me talking generally about mental health. But usually we do have questions. And with those questions, I do want to state that if your name isn't clear on who you are, I won't necessarily call you out. And I'm not going to say like how I know people necessarily, but there's only so much we can do about confidentiality and anonymity. Now, every week I put it so that it can actually have people see the chats afterwards, but I don't know if that actually works or not because it doesn't seem to from what I've seen before. So maybe somebody will be able to see what questions you ask, maybe not, but either way, this is not a confidential thing. This is online, and we are posting this for the world to see. But ask your questions, and let's talk about mental health and what provides mental health for you. Hopefully, also I'll have internet working before. Yeah, it has worked before. It being mental health, maybe therapy, always. But that's my dad, Johnny Demsick. First to subscribe. It's always great to have a dad fan. All right, so come on with your questions, and until then, I'm just going to start talking about mental health. This has been a fun week for me. Just got okay. Wait, I got one. Happy Hooves, which is a great organization that people should all look into. What's one thing that helps you feel grounded when life gets chaotic? So there's a psychology called the state of flow, and I actually had somebody even ask me about the book Flow, which I don't know when it was written, but I would say, I mean, it's an older book in terms of mental health. Like, it's not the newest. I don't mean like it's an old book. It might be 80s, 90s or something like that, but it is a classic. And it talks about flow psychology. And the state of flow can be anything. You could be playing an instrument, you could be doing the dishes, you could be cleaning, you could, if you're ever like jammed out when you're cleaning, where you're like listening to music and it's just kind of like going in the flow of it all, where time starts to like disappear. That's called the flow state. Surfers talk about flow a lot. You can get it with a horse, riding a horse, taking care of a horse, working in the barn, anything that you've done over and over, man, that helps you feel grounded. So if your life is getting chaotic, finding something that you can do that you can experience a state of flow and really having the presence of mind to having presence of mind. Okay. So I'm doing it with the intention of being focused on that thing. And a lot of my race that I did last weekend, when I did my ultra race, I was doing that. I was just focusing and being present and just experiencing the run for what it was. Now, it didn't quite have the effect of timelessness that I hope with the state of flow, but it still was draining. But often I can get there, right, where I can experience that state of flow. And according to flow psychology, the more you experience flow throughout life, the better and happier you'll be. So that's one way to stay grounded when your life feels chaotic. Yeah. Okay. More questions. Come on, people. I got people watching, but nobody's asking questions. Feel free to stack the questions too if you're in the group, and waves come in and help me. Listening and watching waves come in, it helps me. Yeah, and actually visualizing. Once when mine is sleep. When I am chaotic, I just can sleep. Man, that's a gift. That's a gift when you can sleep. Yeah. Happy Hooves put a link to the book. Definitely recommend that flow book, The Psychology of Optimal Movement. Wait, Optimal Experience. There it is. Yeah. So if you cannot go to the ocean, you can visualize the ocean. And practicing that skill set has a lot of benefits. I like to go to the forest and see trees and mountains, but I live in Florida. So while I could go to the ocean doesn't do much for me. But I can close my eyes and I can see the trees and I can see how they sway in the wind. I can see the leaves and see how they fall, and watching those leaves kind of drift as they're falling in my mind can really help me feel grounded and no longer feeling chaotic. But if you can just go to sleep, that's great. Dreams are so interesting because what we're doing is when we're sleeping is we are processing sometimes trauma, sometimes things from our past, sometimes just little things that we experience throughout the day, and it plays with it. And I wish people would play with that more when they're awake too, where creatively you're thinking about your experience of the day, meaning, purpose. You're trying different things out, trying different roles out, and in that process, you're kind of helping yourself learn. But we learn a lot while we're asleep. How can creativity, nature, or movement help support mental well-being? The gift of your imagination is one of the most powerful gifts. But if you're not steering your imagination, so if you imagine being in a car and you're on the road, if your hands are not on the wheel, it is a matter of time before you end up in one ditch or the other. It's just going to happen. And in the same thing with imagination, if you are not actively using your imagination, then you are either going to fall into depression or anxiety at a certain point. Those are the two ditches. Anxiety is about the future, depression about the past, typically. And so those two forces will eventually pull you in unless you start to activate your imagination. But if your imagination is activated, guess what? You can't actually experience the depression. Okay, somebody's having their questions not show up. How do we get to flow? Okay, so this is a great question. We can get to flow by having our skill and the challenge meet in this kind of golden ratio. So if you have too much of a challenge, then you're going to end up being anxious. If you've too little of a challenge, you're going to be bored. And so that state of flow is where you meet that challenge. So if you want to experiencing a state of flow, ask yourself, do I feel overwhelmed? If so, how do I get a challenge that's a little bit more acceptable for me, accessible? And then if it's like, I'm not engaged enough, okay, how do I increase the challenge of that moment? And you can do that with like meditation, right? Or breath work, where you're focusing more and more. And then if you're like, okay, I'm getting bored here and I'm starting to get distracted, okay, increase the challenge. You can do that through ice bath therapy. You can do that through visualization meditation. You can do that through breath work, right? But being more engaged. You can do that through dancing. Literally add music to it, get in it, and get more involved and engaged. On the other hand, if you are overwhelmed, let's focus on real simple stuff. So that's kind of the ratio for the how to get into flow. Okay, where we are. Florida is a bummer. Maybe the Midwest should be an option for you. Yeah. I grew up in Michigan, and the Midwest is definitely good for my mental well-being, especially experiencing the cold and that fall. And right now it's beautiful watching. Honestly, there was like a part of the race that we were running through the forest and the leaves were falling. And it was like, there's something that makes me feel like I'm in a movie, and it feels epic every time I am in the fall and I'm watching the leaves drift down. And yeah, that was very meditative. If the whole run was like that, that would have been an easier day, because it was really relaxing and beautiful. All right, so let's keep these questions coming, guys. All right, what is my chat? Okay, I'm currently recovering from a concussion and suddenly kind of obsessed with cleaning and decorating, like making my surroundings perfect. Yeah, it's interesting that being maybe a good distraction for you mentally. I've never, well, I was like, I've never had a concussion. Actually, I've had so many concussions, but I have struggled with migraines a lot. And so thinking was painful for me, and my brain was hyperactive. So finding a way to focus my mind on something is a really helpful thing. And yeah, experiencing that state of flow does actually diminish pain too. So I wouldn't be surprised if that cleaning, decorating, if you're getting into the flow of it, will really help. Trying to balance, but how to cope. Yeah, exactly. Um, it's a great thing to have. What's a lesson you've learned about mental health that you wish you knew sooner? Oh, so many things. The biggest first one for me was what shadow work actually looked like. So I grew up in a very Christian cultural background, and we were supposed to, the Bible says to flee from temptation. You got to flee from a temptation, you know? And while that concept might be good, what it ended up being preached as was flee from anything that even revolves around temptation, including what is internally going on with you. And the opposite is actually what shadow work is that if we find this darkness, we're actually drawing it into the light. So the darker elements of your personality are redeemable according to shadow work and the Bible too, really. But like in Christian culture, it didn't feel that way. So like that was a huge shifting point for me, because there's all these parts of my nature, these aspects of my personality that I was diminishing because I was just trying to be more like Christ-like, and that was like sacrificial and like rule obeying, because the rule obeying part of me was good, but the one that was rebellious wasn't. Well, that's not actually true. There's lots of good reasons for rebellion. The order is not always the ideal, and we need sometimes to challenge the order, right? And there's so many different examples of that, but shadow work is game changing. There was a question that didn't come through about how you, yeah, but I did answer the how do you get to the flow of having the challenge and the skill meet together. I find that when I feel out of control, I control my surroundings. It was the only thing I can control. Yes, and so that's a cope, right? And that's okay, right? So like we are naturally going to cope with the things that we're struggling with, and even like numbness after mourning, like it's a cope, and that's okay. But being aware that you're coping and then trying to gently balance that, right? So in other words, don't go, okay, my instinct is to control my surroundings, because in my childhood, I had so much chaos that I developed this pattern for control. And so I know that isn't healthy. So I'm just going to throw myself into chaos. That's going to backfire. Also, don't go, well, it's me, my instinct. Now I've got this natural thing that I'm going to control. So I'm going to control everything. This is the nuance and the balance that is so important with your mental health, is saying, hey, look, I'm understanding, accepting, and gracious to myself for the reasons why I have these patterns of wanting to control. And I'm going to just stretch myself gradually. Stretching as a metaphor, right? Physically, if you just go like, I want to do the splits. Okay, cool. And I'm just going to pry my legs apart. My friend tell you, my dedication to wanting to do the splits, you probably blocked out that memory and how bad it went. Me just thinking I could just do it. It's not going to go well. You can't just force yourself into the splits. Don't watch the movies and think in a montage you're going to learn how to do the splits. You gradually, slowly increase your range of motion. And having the same attitude with your mental health. When you're gradually increasing, when you find your way of coping, gradually increase the range, but don't go too fast. And when you start to get from uncomfortable to painful, you're going too fast. You want to stay in that just slightly uncomfortable range. What coping strategies work best for you when you're anxious or down? So those are two different for me. Okay, so not the same. Although there is one that works for both for me, which is dancing. Dancing is one thing that I have to say, what a great tool if you can allow yourself to do it and not worry about what it looks like and just move and just play the music and move to it, because it is so powerful. You can express sadness, you can express difficulty, you can express joy. There's someone whose questions aren't coming up, and I don't know why their questions aren't coming up, because they've got a YouTube and they've logged into it, but they are asking me to talk more about shadow work. I actually have an interview that I did, but I'm going to redo it with my supervisor about shadow work. So subscribe and look into this video, because we're going to have more and more in the shadow about shadow work. But shadow work is tough to do, because the shadow is the parts of your personality that you don't like, so you shove it into your subconscious. So how are you going to be aware of the things that you are purposely unaware of, right? This is the paradox of shadow work. How do I know what my shadow is? Ask your spouse which parts of your personality you're in denial of, and you're probably going to get divorced pretty quick. So that might not be a good strategy for shadow work, but it will teach you what she'll tell, or he will tell you, whatever you have. They'll tell you all the things that you don't want to admit about yourself. That is your shadow. A great Southern Baptist impression. Thanks. It also shows up with the people that you resent. Stop it. Stop it, divorcing. Yeah, I'm just teasing, but I'm just saying your partners know. And I mean, I had a conversation with one of my friends where they accused me of being judgmental. And I kind of mentioned that I'm doing shadow work on this, actually, because I know there's a part of me, because my instinct would be to go, that's ridiculous. I'm the least judgmental person ever, because so much of my core value is about not being judgmental. So many of the things that I live, my principles about not judge therapists, not judgmental, right? So that judgmental aspect of me is something that I love to shove into denial. And my first instinct when somebody calls me on being judgmental is to say, no, I'm not being judgmental. And now I'm trying to go, okay, there's probably an aspect of judgment. Let's process that. Let's incorporate it in my values. So it doesn't mean we go, okay, it's fine to be judgmental, right? But this judgmental aspect of me, to understand it, accept it, and bring it into the values that I have of being open-minded, right, and understanding, is something that I can do. That's shadow work. That's the deep shadow work. Okay. I've been thinking about, is God pleased with me since I believe God is a loving, forgiving, caring God? My answer is yes. And that makes me feel good, thinking about myself as a youth trying hard. I think that's more of a comment. But yeah, exactly. And hopefully not thinking as a rule-oriented punishment mindset, which is really dangerous psychologically. How do you allow God to lead without yourself getting in the way? I tend to get in my head and overthink out wanting to make a mistake. And just to, mention here, this is a therapy discussion. I have no problem talking about God if people want to, but those of you who are not God-centered, don't believe in higher power or anything like that, that's fine too. But the lead, I actually did this metaphor today about the dancing, and without getting in your own way, Well, one, honestly, is looking at the patterns of how you tend to cut it off and get in your way, and then why. And what are those patterns? And processing like that is something that is really helpful with journaling. Like so often, I can't get my clients to journal. And if I could just get my clients to journal, it would be so powerful for them to see the process. I'm giving them prompts. I want them to look back and realize the way that they've grown and realize those patterns and start to go to the emotional root of those things. So to see, why is it that I have a hard time with controlling this issue? Because I guarantee you there's going to be like some kind of wound or darkness or something like limiting belief that you can then surrender. And that will be the simple answer of how you can get into that space where you're not getting in your own way. So your answer to my coping question had a lot to do with movement. Why is movement so important? Is exercise or movement something you suggest for others? There's so much about movement that is powerful, especially with music. The music therapy and then meeting in rhythm of it is something that allows you to feel in sync. And it's like our bodies are mostly water, there's our heart and it's pumping, right? So that's a rhythm, right? And being able to move with an experience, there is something physically, so many of these things I wish people would understand. They're not like fluff, they're actually scientific physics. They're just microphysics. They're atomic physics, right? They're even with like your mental processing of the stuff that's your in your head is neurons firing. It matters because it's matter. So if it's like a problem is all in your head, that doesn't mean you could just think it away. There are actually neurons in your head. And the rhythm of your body, like there's a book called The Body Keeps Score that talks about this stuff with how your body can hold trauma, it can hold tension, right? It can be on guard and increase anxiety, and dancing actually naturally breaks that up. So your answer to my coping question had a lot. Oh, sorry, I already answered that one. Is exercise or movement? Yeah. Doesn't moving, dancing, expression produce endorphins that lessen depression? Yes, and that is another benefit. Is that starting to move naturally releases endorphins, and if you can partner dance, then you add in the oxytocin, which is the love hormone, as they call it. It's another feel-good hormone and another thing. With journaling, have you suggested having them use ChatGPT for prompts? I suggest journaling without a prompt, maybe creating creative journaling. Doesn't have to be writing. So when it comes to ChatGPT, it's important to understand that what ChatGPT is, how to use it, and how not to use it. Okay, so ChatGPT is not a good therapist because it is trying to people please you all the time. Okay, ChatGPT is ChatGPT needs therapy itself. It's codependent. Okay, and so it is constantly trying to predict what you want it to say. And it's really good at that. Okay. So it's like love bombing the crap out of you, right? If you're trying to get with ChatGPT because you're struggling with being in a relationship with a narcissist, you've chosen to fall right back into it. It's not probably going to have the same abuse that it was, but it is a dangerous thing. Now, with that said, it doesn't mean you can't use ChatGPT. It means you have to be very specific on what you're looking for. And you have to be very specific on what you're asking it to do. I would rather have it be an aid with a therapist that you're using as a primary prompt, or if you can't afford therapy, use a book. Now you can use ChatGPT to help you with this book, but have the book be the guide. Okay. So let's use a very specific example. There's The Happiness Trap, I want to say, by Russ Harris, which is a really good book on acceptance and commitment therapy. And if you read a chapter of that and then ask ChatGPT to give you journaling prompts according to that chapter, right, that'll help you to process how you can apply that in your life, that might be very helpful. Okay. as an example. I hope that answers your question. All right, let me look here. Yeah, there's also the brain gut connection that I'm trying to. There's somebody who can't actually message on the YouTube, so I'm trying to look at their stuff on text messages at the same time. So it's a little hard to do. This is multitasking like crazy on this YouTube streaming thing. So hopefully I'm doing okay. But anyway, the brain gut connection. Yeah, like so your body, your mind, your heart is all connected. I remember for a long time I thought the heart was a metaphor for your emotions. And I thought it was interesting that it was a metaphor, but it was just like, oh yeah, your heart, your feelings are actually in your brain, not in your heart. And then I got heartbroken and experienced it where there was a pain in my chest. And I realized, oh, it's not just a metaphor. There's actually something hardwired in you that your heart is part of your emotional core. Do I understand the physics of all of that? No, I'm not saying I do. But I'm just saying it is real. There is something there. And evidence-based, it's shown to be effective over and over. So movement therapy, and it could be, different types of movements. It doesn't have to be dancing. There's some people that hate dancing, and there's other ways that you can move. But moving to rhythm is great. And, it's like when I say dancing, I'm not saying it's got to be like, right? It can just be, right? Or it could be running in rhythm. How do you recognize when you start to feel stressed or overwhelmed? Yeah, I mean, honestly, the most common way is when I have a disproportionate reaction to something that shouldn't bother me much. So a good example of that is somebody cuts me off in traffic and I'm like, like, okay, what's going on? Right? That's why I try to stop myself and go, okay, Richard, that's not normal. That's not okay. What's going on, little buddy? So it's like I practice being my own therapist and kind of go like, let's get to the emotional root and figure out what's going on because you're probably struggling and kind of stressed out. So I actually had that happen recently, not about traffic. What was it? I was preparing my sermon. This is so bad. I was preparing my sermon and I was trying to copy and paste something. And it wasn't copying, and I had to paste it like multiple times, and it would paste the wrong thing. It was such a little thing, but I found myself going, and I'm like, oh wait, hold on, that's not okay. My heart is not in the right place, and I'm like, I need to take a second, regulate, grounding, and we talked about what all that looks like, and do that before I keep trying to move forward. And that's another thing that I wish people would do more often, is like just take a break. Like 2 minutes of grounding exercise can help you feel so much less stressed and struggling so much less. It's worth it. Take the time I'm literally talking about, I'm not talking about 30 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes can make a big difference of breath work or visualization meditation can make a huge difference. Okay, where are we? I know of therapists that are like the Chat GDP, which is the gross domestic product, apparently, that you were explaining. So I know therapists that are big gross domestic product chatters. No, I'm sure he means GTP, but that's all right. Yes, unfortunately, there are therapists that just tell you what you want to hear. And that's not great. So I actually had a client that really wanted to just be validated, and they went to a different therapist and then contacted me later and was like, I'm having this issue and I'm really struggling with it. And, it's like I helped them with the issue. And they were like, why didn't my therapist think about that? And I'm like, well, you did go to a therapist just because you wanted to be validated. So they're probably not going to give you challenging methods to work through problems. And their response was, oh yeah, that makes sense. I shouldn't have done that, should I? And I was like, well, not if you want to grow, not if that's your main goal. And they did decide to move to a different therapist. And I specifically even said to them, find it, like, I didn't say it like in a mean way. All right. It was fine. If they wanted to come back to me, they could have. But I didn't recommend that. I recommended them going to a different therapist, which is fine. You know, is ACT or CBT better for overcoming trauma? Evidence-based, they are equivalent in what basically the research shows. Okay, so in terms of a scientific statement, uh, application is what really matters. Okay, so ACT, by the way, is acceptance commitment therapy. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. ACT is a cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, so there's 3 waves of behavioral therapy. The first was behavioral therapy, which is all about behavior. And the second wave was cognitive behavioral therapy, where they realized that the way you think is just like behavior in its effect. So, in other words, even if you don't do something, if you think it, it will have the same impact on your mental health. And then they developed that with CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, the third wave is where they incorporate mindfulness and they get a little bit more of a framework. So, ACT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and EMDR, you could say, arguably, is third wave of that movement. I like ACT better because it talks about, it has more tools than cognitive behavioral therapy, and the framework I find very useful. But if it doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with CBT. It's tried and true. What are some small things you do to take care of your mental health? There's a lot of things that I do to take care of my mental health, but they're not necessarily small. There's a hard to find a small thing to do because I do so much. I have accepted the fact that I am high maintenance when it comes to my mental health. So in other words, keeping my mental health, good is something that takes a lot of work for me, and I practice it regularly. Okay, yeah. If you can't dance, you can sing and hum. And somebody made that comment, and that's a good point. But working out is helpful for my mental health. Ice bath is helpful for my mental health. Visualization, prayer, breath work, dancing, like I talked about before. There's so many different things that I do for my mental health. Processing, talking to friends. I have a list of people that I go through on the phone, and I try to have multiple different people that I can talk to, that I feel that I can trust, that I know will be there for me to be able to process through that thing. Okay, I had to do this week. I asked the yard man to trim a palm. He did it, but he cut my, okay, I'm going to botch that word, cephalra horribly. I was fuming. I sent an email stating how unhappy I was, and I said, don't text back, I am. I said, don't text back, I am. Oh, this is one. Okay. I'm going to bed next week. And the next morning, I apologized. Okay. I understand now. I sent an email. Sorry. I sent an email stating I'm unhappy. And I said, don't text back. I'm going to bed. The next morning, I apologized. For goodness sake, it's a plant. And I really overreacted. I was stressed and overwhelmed. And so I behaved badly. Yeah. And it's like human, we do it, right? And it goes back to that shadow work, is recognizing those things and then adjusting, but in a way, hopefully, that you don't beat yourself up, will be so transformational for next time. Because if you beat yourself up too much, then there's a part of your brain. This is really, I think this is interesting. Okay. So this is like a very helpful tip. If you beat yourself up too much about the mistakes you make, you think you'll be less likely to make it. But you've basically had and it's the same, by the way, if you have a over strict parent that punishes you so severely, you're going to start to hide it. You're going to start to go, okay, deception is necessary because I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes, and I have to use deception to survive because the penalty is so severe. We think as human beings, the more severe you make the penalty, the less likely people are going to do it. That is not true. because what ends up happening is you create too much anxiety, too much stress, too high stakes, and people then fall into deception as a tool, even self-deception. So this works internally with yourself. This works with the government and state. I'll give you an example. This might be controversial, but this is what the science says. This is what I think is an evidence-based statement on the fact. Okay, when it comes to driving intoxicated, our criminal system tries so hard to punish so severely because of the advocating that's happened by like Moms Against Drunk Driving and different things like that, MAD organization, that when somebody has a DUI, they often have another DUI right after that. Because what we've done is we've had the stakes so high that they're so depressed and anxious about what's going on because of the DUI and the consequences that are eventually going to happen because of that. And that high level anxiety, well, somebody who is prone to use alcohol, when do they use it? When they're anxious, when they're stressed, when they're struggling. It's their way of coping. So guess what? You've almost guaranteed that they're going to drink a lot more after that DUI. That's the pattern. And then the second DUI happens, and hopefully then they start to get help. I've seen this so many different times, guys. If you can then start to recognize this process and not be so cruel on yourself, diminish the consequences to not too severe, and just make slight adjustments, you're going to come so much further in your mental health. Progress has now become, so it's like awareness has now become something that we reward rather than we punish. That's the shift, right? If we can get to a point where awareness is a good thing and we are rewarding it, honesty, right? Genuineness is what we reward. So self-disclosure is something that we celebrate. What are some common misconceptions you think people have about mental health, and you think the conversation around mental health has changed in the last few years? Actually, that's a great transition to what I was just saying, because that has been a big shift. I'm gonna be shady here. Okay, you're getting real thoughts. So like one former psychologist, he's no longer a clinical psychologist, but he has a PhD in psychology, that I think is going out there spreading harmful stuff, is Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is the old school mentality where we thought we just got to be strict. We just got to tell people what to do. And he had this whole even controversy over troubled teen industry stuff, where he would send people to these troubled teen things and they end up getting really they end up being worse. So all the research shows that all of those troubled teen things on a grand scale, so I'm not saying it never helped anyone, and I'm not saying they're all bad, right? But on a grand scale, the research on troubled teen is that it was more likely to produce adversarial things, more likely that they'll commit more crimes. Those people have become less well adjusted. They are less successful, like by all quantifiable metrics. People that have been part of that scared straight teen troubled, boot camp mentality stuff for mental health, that are supposed to be like straightened out, have gotten way worse. It is through acceptance, grace, love that people make better transitions. What kind of breath work do you recommend? So I'm pretty simple. Well, I like ice bath therapy, honestly, and incorporating breath work into ice bath therapy, because it's helpful for the body, and but I know it's not practical for everyone. But that's my go-to. But honestly, a very simple breath work is just a rhythm of breathing in and visualizing light and love, and then breathing out and visualizing a release of tension and stress. Going back and forth between those things is a very helpful thing. Women can't sew ice bath when worked up. Women can't do ice bath when worked up. I'm sure there's so many, for all of these things, there's so many, like somebody posted a comment on one of my YouTube videos where they were talking about how they don't have the ability to do visualization, imagination exercises. There's a thing in ACT called workability. Different things work for different people. Finding what works for you as part of the process. Just be generally curious about what might work for you, and kind of find your thing. Yeah, if it backfires for you and it's causing more anxiety, going back to the journaling thing. Now, the one thing I will say, and this isn't true about like an ice bath therapy, that's pretty intense, so it's like immediate feedback. But when it comes to mental health in general, just give it a little time for some of that stuff and process to see if it's overall helpful in the long term. Okay. And in terms of how the conversations have changed about mental health for better or worse, maybe both. There's so many different things that I could go with direction on that, because like I think I think our conversation about mental health as we've come away from the disease model has been better. We used to use the disease model to try to say how legit this stuff is in your head, but mental health just doesn't work like physical health. It just is different, right? There's no X-ray to show depression. It does matter, right? It is matter, but it isn't a broken bone. It just works different. It's a more complicated system, and so that conversation has mostly improved. Are there ways that things have not improved and things have gone the other way? Yeah, I mean, there's corruption in every industry. I think what we've done to autism is terrible. We've broadened it so much that it's no longer a helpful diagnosis, and we have people that are more on the able side of the spectrum, more on the functional side of the spectrum, that are speaking on autism like they're the experts on autism in a way that I think is harmful to people that have profound autism or people that are caretaking people with profound autism. And that's one of probably my biggest frustrations when it comes to the mental health industry, because it's just terrible what we've done to that diagnosis. And people, they don't know they're doing harm, but I think that they're doing harm with the way that they talk about autism sometimes. And there's other examples like that. But I mean, and honestly, the other thing that I would say is social media, with having like these kind of watered down mental health messages, I've also made the conversation worse too. Sounds like awareness should definitely be part of the current chatter around mental health. How can we become more aware? Some easy practices. How can we feel awareness in our thoughts, body, heart, gut? So one of the things that I would say is that's not actually that hard to be aware. Okay. When you feel that acceptance and unconditional self-regard. So if you're like, I accept myself and I'm at peace with myself, in like a real genuine way, not in a like I think I'm great self-defensive kind of way, like I gotta hold this image of myself that's good. The problem is, and there's a concept in ACT called self as context, seeing myself as flexible and adaptable and different in different circumstances, versus self as content. I'm brave, I'm smart, I'm or an idiot. Like it could be positive or negative self as content, right? But seeing my image as these states of being or content of reality, right? Could be also even more shallow. I'm a therapist, right? I am a PhD guy, right? I am whatever. Creates a lack of awareness. And so having your self identity, so that's where it's like, be careful and very slow to identify yourself with any group, diagnosis, states of being, right? Reject every title, even that of the good man, because those all work against awareness. And then practice thinking about your body and scanning it, adjusting different things, thinking about your heart, scanning it, adjusting different things, thinking about your your thoughts and starting to write them down can be really helpful. I was shocked, honestly, when I started working with clients who couldn't vocalize their thoughts because they just don't know what they're thinking. And that probably came from a childhood where it wasn't safe to say what you were thinking. It wasn't encouraged to say what you're thinking. And practicing that is such a good tool. So start simple, like you would with a child, right? Self parenting is what we're kind of doing in the therapy process. We're reparenting ourselves. For non-visual thinkers, maybe the tapping method could be an option. It taps into your nervous system. You can find apps, the tapping method. And I'm not sure if you mean EMDR, but EMDR does use the tapping method as one of it. It also uses eye movement traditionally, but the tapping has become more and more popular. And it kind of like does this thing. So there's a lot of debate about why it works. It does work. Okay, my current thing is I think it just distracts us enough that we're more willing to engage. So there's a part of our brain that is always trying to resist the transformation that even we want. And so having an extra kind of thing that like distracts us will help us to go to that troubled space of trauma in a way that can really produce really powerful results. Do you think people are more open to mental health online than in person? It really varies. I will say, I was saying this actually on the phone recently, but the thing that bugs me is when people aren't willing to try online therapy. There is something with this generation where they're more willing to engage openly online, sometimes more openly on text than even video chats. So that's interesting. Typically, I don't encourage chatting, texting. I'd rather do where I can see and really interact. But it depends on the client. I had this one really awkward conversation with this guy where I asked him about something. He's like, I'm not willing to talk about that. And then like all of a sudden I got a text message from him and it was about that thing. And so on the surface, we were having a normal conversation about something fairly shallow. And then in text message, we were having an in-depth conversation about something way more intimate. He just couldn't verbalize it. He couldn't vocalize it. And so finding a way that you can, again, it's workability. I'll take it. We can grow from there. Okay. To touch a bit more on social media thing, how online spaces become safer and more supportive of mental health. Yeah, and I probably said this sometime before, but like they've done research from Facebook on how social media affects mental health, and they found it's terrible, and they just didn't change a thing. There was there, you know, creating your own little social network. And honestly, group chats are one great way to do that because it's algorithmless. So you're not relying on the algorithm to put some content out there more than others. And what I would say is if you're going to do a group chat for your own mental health, one, add people intentionally and carefully. Two, explain exactly what you're asking for, right? Being very clear about what you want from people is so helpful to set them up ahead of time, right? So in other words, if you need to just vent at times to somebody, like saying ahead, I'm not looking for advice. I just want to vent. Is that something you can do? Sets yourself up for success and is so much more helpful. You can even say to people, look, I just need you to, at the end of this, tell me I'm pretty and that you love me, right? It's like, okay, I can do that, right? Like, let's just go, right? So with the group chats, if you're like, hey, look, we're going to be group chatting about mental health. We're going to be encouraging each other. We're not going to problem solve here. We are not going to bring in stuff that is not related to mental health because it'll bog down the chat. Is that something you're interested in? If yes, cool. Then you get the group together and you start doing something like that. That way you can create an online space that is more supportive for mental health. But I would say get off, like, not I'm not saying get off social media or whatever, although that's probably uh, a smart thing for a lot of people to do, or at least spend less time on social media. But like, don't rely on an algorithm to try to create a safe environment. You can do it, you can try it, but it's never going to be perfect. I mean, I'm trying it right now. I mean, I guess this is that in some ways, where I'm doing it because I'm trying to create a reach for people that aren't necessarily in my circle, starting with a group of people that I know and trust, but hoping that more and more, man, I'm loving happy who's providing all this material for me to respond to. Everyone else is kind of tuned out, I guess. But anyway, um, Anxious Generation, yeah, it's a good book on the research about social media and how damaging it's done and how much anxiety it creates. I also think it is basically created almost an epidemic of ADHD. So they've actually done research where we have less of an attention span than a goldfish. We used to have more. And having these flashes of different images is just not something the brain is equipped for. If you think about it in nature, we only get flashed in lightning storms where all of a sudden, boom, another image. But on social media, we got image, 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 and we're just streaming. And it's like our brain is not equipped to deal with it. I was talking to a friend this morning about it, and we were talking about how both of us struggle with not doom scrolling, and we find ourselves doing it even when we're watching a movie and then doom scroll, and we're like, what is going on? Like, throw the phone out. What's happening? Our brains are not equipped to handle it. And so it is an epidemic. I think that's not an exaggeration to say that word. So it's like for our mental health, for our attention span, for so many things, these are just not helpful things. And taking at least breaks away from them is huge. Is there any specific therapy that is beneficial to addicts in general, or is it more individualized than that? So obviously, AA and the 12 steps have been shown to be very effective for addicts. There's also another thing that is shown to be, but it's very controversial in at least those circles. But it's basically what is going on with an addiction is their reward system has been hacked. And so having a way to reward them to make healthy decisions can be very effective. So the specific therapy that is really beneficial to addicts, and a lot of research is showing that it is this basically where you're creating a reward system where you sometimes even financially, but there's a lot of other ways to reward people too that are not financial. You reward people for doing things that are increasing their mental health, helping them cope in positive ways that are not addiction, not drugs. And basically, it's like very reward focused. So that has been proven to be really effective. Um, then there's a lot of mindfulness stuff that can sometimes get past those defense mechanisms that's been proven to be very effective with therapy or with addicts as well. Yeah, YouTube isn't social media. Yeah, that's true. It's less social. But the reels, I mean, I got reels with my cat, right? But like they can be harmful um, if they are not limited, like those attention span one for over. And I struggle with it for sure. Um, okay, I'm just bouncing from things. Is there any specific therapy? Okay. So kind of like ABA therapy, providing reinforcement for positive behaviors. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's therapy, behavioral therapy in general, right? Is operant conditioning, right? That just like you would with a cat, um, or a dog, I guess is more traditional. But it's like quick reward, quick reward, quick reward, right? That's what's happening with addiction. Smoking is one of the hardest addictions to stop for people because all of the consequences are usually really long off and all the rewards are quick reward, quick reward, quick reward. So if you you can hack the system by basically creating your own for doing that, a quick reward, down to like, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's like, sometimes this might sound like a kid thing, but I've recommended it for adults too, is like giving yourself stickers when you did something good, right? And like every time you allowed yourself to have here, a good example, the compulsion wave exercise. So in the compulsion wave exercise, I feel the urge to use. I sit in the, I allow myself to experience that desire, but I don't move. I don't do anything until it passes. Then I give myself a little sticker and celebrate it. Give myself a little reward, right? Give myself a little benefit. I mean, honestly, you could, end up switching addictions and struggling with sugar addiction with this one, but there are people that they've gained a lot of weight, but they gave them a piece of candy every time they, had a compulsion that they didn't use, right? And for those who were going to die from, drug usage, that was a improvement, right? And then they can do something else for working on that issue. Eventually, getting to the core of the person's struggle is helpful, and of course, I recommend therapy. But or the 12 steps for that kind of stuff. But yeah, little reward system stuff is so important. That person that can only text, I am looking back for questions, and if any questions that you have too. Your cake is better than cocaine. Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting is the fight or flight thing, that pull, that system is actually even more addicting than cocaine or sugar. So the most difficult actually addiction to give up is responding with the fight or flight system. So and that could be, again, anger, right? So you're trying to give up anger, or in terms of the flight thing, right? That retreating into yourself and running away from relationships. So that's the hardest addiction to actually give up, which I just think is an interesting kind of random thought. All right, cool. Well, we are about at time, and the questions have started to diminish. So I'm going to close this up for this week. Hopefully this conversation was helpful. Hope you all continue to work on your mental health, and we will be gathering together next Sunday at 7. I'm also hoping to post maybe even 2 episodes this week. I was actually hoping to do an episode of my interview yesterday. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah, good time to practice gratitude. We won't see it till the other side of Thanksgiving. But hopefully you have plenty of things to be thankful for. Practicing gratitude is very therapeutic as well. And I'll drop that episode hopefully tomorrow, and then the other episode after Thanksgiving is what my goal is, because I want to keep doing those interviews and the therapist reacts stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoy that too. All right. So thank you everybody for joining in the chat. Thank you everyone for your questions, and hopefully I'll see you guys all next week. Happy Thanksgiving. Nope, but I didn't press end. End. Gratitude and growth. Exactly.